far too long. We've got that YouTube will have this up in a couple of days, so I mean, that's a good development from an informatics context. Yeah, so informatics. Welcome. It's really good to see you, and welcome to you in the audience. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program a friend of mine and a friend of the world, and that's the Honorable Ahmad Kamal. He's been in the Foreign Service of the country of Pakistan and involved at the United Nations for a long and distinguished career, including being the ambassador for the country of Pakistan to the United Nations. He's known by one and all in the United Nations systems, I think, as the chairman and one who was very instrumental in what is called Informatics, which was establishing a cybernation connection for the UN system around the world, for which many people remember him. He's very interested in technology, and it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you once again to Conversations in Manhattan Network.
It's my pleasure to be here again with you.
So good to see you. As I say, it's been too long. As my template and my want is, could you share briefly, perhaps, your background? You've been involved in, I guess, 40 years in the diplomatic service and that, but share your background. And then we want to talk some about the Middle East, about South Asia, and maybe if we can get some in about informatics or technological developments of communication that I know you're interested in. But your own personal background, please.
Well, I was born in India in 1938. Came across as a refugee to Pakistan in 1947 at the time of partition. Came with the family with just the clothes on our back. Started a new life in Pakistan. Studied at school and at university. Then I was sent abroad to France, and I did my bachelor's and master's and doctorate in Paris.
You've done your high school and so forth up to
in Pakistan.
In Pakistan,
yes.
Yeah. In Lahore, or?
In Karachi and Lahore.
Lahore and Karachi. Okay.
And then competed in the competition for the Foreign Service. Managed to get into the Foreign Service.
After your undergraduate work in France?
No, after my doctorate.
Oh, you took a doctorate where then?
In Paris. At the
in Paris,
yes.
Okay, I see.
And then competed, got into the Foreign Service, did 40 years in the diplomatic service of Pakistan, including almost a dozen years as ambassador to the United Nations, both in Geneva and in New York. Retired about 8-9 years ago. After retirement, was appointed by the Secretary General as a senior fellow at the United Nations. There are only 2 senior fellows.
Really?
And it's a sort of advisory teaching appointment. It has very high rank. And at the same time, I teach. I'm a professor at 6 universities in the United States. And I also run a program called the Ambassadors Club.
Yes,
at
I
the United
think you
Nations.
found that, did you?
Yes.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah.
And that is a program of outreach from the United Nations into universities, essentially in the United States, but also abroad.
And that's outreach, United Nations, to public intellectuals and so forth?
To university students. We have ambassadors at the UN who are my panel.
Right.
And we are interactively video conferencing into universities with students, answering questions, taking care of their curriculum, etc.
What a wonderful idea! Taking advantage of the technological communications capability emerging.
It's a fascinating technique because it costs almost nothing.
Right, which is a good price.
And it is totally interactive. And so we run the curriculum of universities insofar as it relates to multilateralism, the United Nations system, etc.
And then do you link up with international relations studies departments or something? And do you have a curriculum of your own coming out of the UN, or how does that work?
Well, normally these universities come to us and they say, can you organize a series of, let's say, a dozen or 14 video conferences? And what we then do is to slice the effort of the United Nations in peacekeeping, in human rights, in all the different areas of activity, in development, in environment, etc.
Really important.
And for each one of them, we have an hour and a half in which we are, in a way, teaching the students for about half an hour or 45 minutes, and then answering questions of students for another 45 minutes.
What a wonderful outreach thing. They have a thing in England called Open University. Are you
it's something like that.
Percy, somebody... I forget the name who started it, but it's like an outreach of communications and education.
But it's formal, and so it's part of the formal curriculum of the universities, this program.
Walter Perry.
Yes, Walter
was the
Perry.
founder of the Open University, and it's been quite successful, I think, because you had a niche of people who hadn't been able to go to university. It's extended educational capability from the UN. Really important, it seems to me, if I may, because you're reaching out.
It enables the universities, the intellectuals, academia, to understand the United Nations, its successes, its failures, its shortcomings, its problems, its potential. And it helps us in the UN to get the views of the public, the students, who are much closer to the pulse of the United Nations than we are ourselves.
You think
because
so?
we are inside, and so we don't see it as well, because you're much too close to the UN, sitting in the UN.
Right, probably not the first institution like that. They're called the Washington Consensus, and people maybe are so inside they can't get a feel. That's really important. And the UN is really an important institution. There's a lot of people who badmouth the UN. But the institutional structure, as we come into a time with all the technological development and the changes, the UN system is an extremely important system that exists and should be vouchsafed.
It's a critical system.
Absolutely.
And the reason for that is that the UN, even though it calls itself an organization, is not really an organization. It's only a table. It's a forum. It's a table with 192 chairs around it. And so all the successes of the UN are the successes of the 192 participants around the table. And all the failures are the failures of the 192 people around that table. So you cannot hold the table responsible for successes or failures.
Nor for the variations in degrees of power, influence by each of the various countries. Some people are more powerful
some are more
than
powerful.
others.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And all that sort of thing has to be ironed out and dealt with somehow. And there are reforms within the UN. Some people but to understand it and vouchsafe it's important, because a lot of people would do away with it. I know there's some people who would do that.
Well, I think those who have power do not like democracy normally. Because if you have power, you don't want to share it with the hoi polloi of the public.
In general, through all of human history, probably.
And those who are the public, who have the numbers on their side, obviously don't have the power, but they have numbers. So the conflict, if you wish, is between those who have power and those who have numbers. And that is the debate.
Those who have power and the people. You could say in a certain sense, and it seems to me like it was like that in Roman times. You'd have the emperors doing well and so forth, and that's it, and it's still with us. But now we have a technological thing with the capability of outreach in multimedia, for crying out loud, and interactive. It's really exciting in terms of the potentiality for consciousness raising, educational.
It is. A lot of that is happening now.
Yeah. And the UN, they have people coming there and things going on at the UN. It's like in a certain sense, at a level of understanding, it's like a university. There's things that go on there, conferences they have, major conferences that they have, that are really educationally significant, not only for the UN, but for the world public in general.
It's a meeting point around that table.
Yes, right.
And the objective of the UN, or the table, the objective of the table is to help the participants around the table draft consensus. Either you have a consensus, or you have a majority which emerges, or the majority has to accept the power of the minority. But that is the debate. In other words, it's a critically important place where all issues which affect each one of us, there's not a single thing that you, Harold Channer, do which is not affected in some form by the United Nations multilateral system. The shirt that you wear has a tag on it which says made in Jamaica or made in China. It has arrived on your back because of a tariff structure negotiated through the UN. When you pick up a telephone and ring somebody, that telephone call proceeds on a wavelength. That wavelength is allocated to the United States through a negotiation which has taken place around that table.
That's right.
When you take a flight from here to Europe, your aircraft travels on a corridor which has been allocated under a negotiation in the International Air Travel Association, another part of the UN system. So nothing that we do which is not affected by some discussion, debate, agreement arrived at around that particular table.
That's right. And as Marshall McLuhan said, we live in a global village.
Yeah.
It's getting more and more close association all around, so we're all interrelated in a very
Quite
real
right.
sense. And we ought to recognize that. And then you have differences of sovereignty and, like we say, power and that sort of thing. So it's very interesting. I know you were involved, I think, in GATT, or General Agreement on Tariffs, and on the beginnings of the World Trade Organization. And you have a global view of things yourself, I presume, because you were encouraging those sort of things. How do you see things in terms of the way the world is organized, in terms of trade groups and so forth, and then the political consequences of that? I know you and I are going to want to talk considerably about the Middle East, Iraq, and South Asia and so forth. But in general, what's your feeling, having dedicated a good deal of your diplomatic work toward helping to build a workable international order?
Yeah, well, the problem is identical to that of the problem of the United Nations.
Right.
That is to say, you have on the one side countries that have power,
That's
whether
right.
it is in trade or whether it is in politics or whether it is in the military sphere. And on the other side, you have a larger number of countries, which are the majority, which have numbers but no power.
Again,
And
back
so
to the people.
the question is, are you going to draft rules which follow what is called rule of law, or are you going to draft rules which give advantage to the more powerful over the less powerful? And that is the debate in the World Trade Organization.
And-
For example,
Yeah, please.
you have a serious problem in the world which is called subsidies. Some rich countries, the United States among them, are giving a lot of money to farmers who are basically inefficient.
Incredible amounts
Yes.
of money. In the
And
case
it
of the
is
United
approximately
States agriculture.
$1 billion a day.
Doesn't go to a family farm, it goes to agribusiness often.
But the point is
Yeah, okay.
that if you believe in economics, which is competition, which is what is called the competitive edge, then he who is a more efficient producer should be able to get the market. And you should not be able to bring in protectionism in order to prevent the more efficient farmer from getting a fairer share of the market.
But the
And
power
so
could-
subsidies are a distortion of competition, and it goes strictly against the laws of economics.
It goes according to the laws of political power.
That's right.
And that's one of the things that people have, I think they were wrestling around these questions in Cro-Magnon caves in the south of France 35,000 years ago.
they're still doing
which
it.
part of the mastodon do I get? Or something like that, I think, is there. Has anything changed in that? I was just reading Lord Keynes the other day. He wrote a thing to his grandchildren in 1930, and he spoke about other things, that the displacement of labor in the productive process, and most economic theories informed by a labor theory of value, whether it's Schumpeter or Van Hayek or Marx or Keynes or whatever, is that the people, mass majority of the people, get income from for a living from their relationship, a labor relationship to production through a job. The assets are increasingly responsible for production. He projected to about this time to his grandchildren from 1930, there was going to be massive induced technological displacement of labor, and that we cannot have a system that only distributes income to the masses through their labor participation in a world economy that's becoming increasingly technologically based, and also capital assets that represent that technology. Do you think there's a problem in that beyond the problems of outsourcing and so forth from the large companies? What do you think?
Outsourcing is an essential part of the problem, because once again the competitive edge is being improved by information technology.
It is indeed.
Hence outsourcing. But then you see the reaction to outsourcing. The people say, we don't care if others are more efficient. We still want to keep the jobs for ourselves. And that is protectionism. So the debate comes back to square one. Do you want protectionism, or do you want rule of law?
Could I put it in another vein, perhaps? We have Michio Kaku, I'm not sure if you know string theory and so forth, works with Brian Greene, and he's come in, we've talked with him, and that another large-scale thing that can be seen that qualitatively makes this time different, perhaps, in terms of, we've been 200,000 years, we can extend our consciousness through technology and make the world other than in an Eden-like sense is given. And so much of that has been led by weapon systems. And we apparently have. He was here on this set in that chair, and I asked him if there was a mistake The Black Swan. Have you seen Mr. Tablet? Unexpected things, the mother of which was the First World War. There was no knowing that those interlinking alliances would set up such a catastrophe. But if there was a mistake among the peoples of the world arguing over power and sort of issues of dignity and so forth, and the weapons that do exist, not just, you know, inflection points of theory or thinking, but weapon systems were to be unleashed, it would apparently now mean, I don't know if you think this or agree with it, maybe disagree, that if they were unleashed, it would mean now the end of the whole human species in a way that we couldn't do in 1945, as much as we were trying to kill each other with firebombing and so forth. Have we crossed an existential new line in terms of evolution of consciousness to where the weapon systems have introduced a new reality, an ontologic reality that should be taken into account,
I think
and
the
changing
debate,
the formulas out of history that can relate to these issues?
The debate is more than just that. The debate is whether power should be the power of ideas or the power of weapons.
Okay.
And this debate was what existed between Greece and Rome. And Rome won because it used the power of weapons, which appeared to it to be stronger than the power of ideas.
I think
but Rome died out.
Yeah.
And Greece has still survived because some of the ideas that were born in Greece are still fundamental ideas with us today.
Okay.
But we seem to have forgotten them. We judge power today as power of destruction.
It has been,
That we can build better bombs, smaller bombs, more destructive capacity, etc. Where is the power of ideas? I want to know. What is it that history will judge us for 500 years from now?
if we're here.
We may not be here, but
the
history will be here.
question of whether or not we've reached a point, existential new reality, where the weapons are so destructive, qualitatively different than what we've had out of
we
history.
can just destroy ourselves.
That apparently, and I asked him that, he said it's more than that. It would be most all the this kind of thing, the destructive capability. It's a new kind of destructive capability. And it was Lord Acton said power tends to corrupt, and absolute power.
I would hope that
absolutely.
human beings have more decency in them than just to be carried away by these lower instincts of brawn and muscle and destructive capacity.
James
come back.
James Joyce had Daedalus say in Finnegan's Wake, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken.
Yes.
Good line, I think, in terms of this thing. And do you think we're at a time of some sort of maybe a qualitative change? That signals an existential, qualitative new reality that has not been characteristic. The species would always continue. But now we have the capability to destroy that. No, it wouldn't be just the tribe in the other village or the other valley. It would be the whole hominoid line.
Let's hope that you are wrong. And that,
what do you think?
And that I think
It can't be
ultimately
tested.
human beings are fundamentally decent.
Yes.
And whereas there are some of us who pride themselves on the quality of their muscles, I think there is a large majority of us that believe that ideas are important and that human decency is important and that we should anchor ourselves in principles, not in power.
Some of the principles of which are enshrined in the institutions of the United Nations system, don't you think?
And
moving in that direction. And what an idealistic kind of thing it was to the foundation in 45.
Yeah, but not just the United Nations.
No.
Some of those principles are enshrined in the fundamental documents of the United States.
That's
if
true.
you read the basic documents of the United States, they have divine inspiration behind them.
There was a collection of people that were very seeing in terms of...
It's the hand of God.
It was, you think,
Oh,
hand
yes.
of God, right? There was a Scottish Enlightenment had something to do with it. There was and there was an industrialization coming. And there was industry was coming, and the change was coming out of the feudal period.
But what foresight.
Yes.
What foresight the Founding Fathers had. And I only hope that we, as children of our Founding Fathers, will be up to the measure of the principles that were enshrined in those fundamental documents and not try to depart from them with policies which are, as I said, power-based rather than idea-based.
The same old thing, the same old principles they try to rely on. There's a saying that the leaders drive fiercely into the future with their eye fixed firmly on the rear view mirror in terms of technological alterations that make the thing different. There could be changes on the positive side that the technology makes available greater numbers of people who could be seen to be haves within the context of our capability. It's at a design level. We have a capability that our inherited systems won't let us realize because we're trapped in history then, and we need some sort of a qualitative transformation forward as we begin to move ahead. And it would be coming from the intellectuals and so forth, and they seem not to have provided an adequate system to give us security or a system in terms of what Bucky Fuller used to call an operating manual for spaceship Earth.
Yes, but part of this is a problem of leadership.
Okay.
Leadership has to come.
Political leadership, you mean?
No, leadership without any adjective attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership has to be statesmanship.
Okay.
And statesmanship should come from the people, from those who have the brains, for those who can think, for those who have doubt. Doubt is important in leadership.
Absolutely.
You must not be a missionary who is convinced of your case. You should have the ability to stand back and ask the question, is it possible that I'm wrong? And because if you don't ask that question, you are surely going to land up in error.
Yeah, it could be that kind of thing. All of that is going, it's sort of a backdrop in a certain sense. We've got ourselves, we're now talking on, what is it? It's August 9th of the year 2007. We've got ourselves into a pretty fix, it would seem, from the United States perspective in Iraq. Could you pay some attention to that? What do you think is involved? What were the motivating factors that got us there? What are the implications in terms of the world to the east and west of Iraq and relationship to the Islamic world? These are issues that you would be aware of, thought of, and maybe you could share some of your thoughts.
The background to Iraq really starts in the relationship between Israel and Palestine. That is the key point. And it is the key point because there are two injustices in conflict in the relationship between Israel and Palestine. The first injustice is what was done to the Jews over history. And it was done to the Jews by the Christians. It started off with the Crusades. The first Crusades, the people who were damaged first were not the Muslims but the Jews by the Crusades. Then you had the Inquisition. Then you had the pogroms. Then you had Nazism. All this was a sort of injustice, and it's a very soft word because it was atrocious injustice which was being done to a population called the Jews by a population called the Christians.
Called a Holocaust.
Call it what you will, but it was wrong, and it will stand forever as a black spot on the history of the world. That's injustice number one. Injustice number two is then that it is compounded by the fact that the type of atrocities which were committed against the Jews were then being committed by the Jews against the Palestinians, who were condemned to give up their lands. Their lands were occupied, they were put into refugee camps, etc., not once, not twice, not for 5 years, 10 years, but for 60 years, for 3 generations. Now, at this point intellectually, you have a conflict between one principle being seen from two different sides. That principle is what is called the right of return. The Jewish argument for Israel is that we as Jews have the right to return to our homeland as guaranteed to us by the Bible.
From the King David's time,
And the Palestinians say, well, if you have a right to return, then we also have a right to return to the lands which we have been occupying for the past 2,000 years. So these two rights of return are in conflict, and we are not in a position to work them out. And as a result, you have a degree of frustration which is fundamental and deep. Now that frustration then cannot be contained in the region. It has to spill over. It spills over into Iraq, it spills over into Iran, it spills over elsewhere. Superimposed on this is a second problem which is not linked to the injustice, which is the problem of oil. Oil, for some reason, is concentrated in this part of the world. The 60% of the world's oil is in this region.
Why did God put all our oil under those countries?
Well, I think it's a question that we could ask God if we ever get a chance.
Right.
But the fact is that the oil is...
a joke.
I thought you were serious.
No, hardly. No, I'm just saying. No.
But you never know. You may be able to get God in this chair, in which case the question may be asked. The problem of oil is that it is being misused in terms of its pricing. Oil, a gallon of oil takes 1,000,000 years to produce, and it takes you 10 minutes to burn it in your car. Now, there's no relationship between 1,000,000 years and 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's hard to
and that has to be calculated in terms of price. But the price that we are paying for oil is derisory. It's minimal. The price of gas could be 10 times more, and it would still not be adequate as a proper pricing of something that has taken 1,000,000 years to produce. But we've got used to cheap oil, and therefore we want to guarantee access to cheap oil. And in getting that guarantee, we are willing to throw away all our principles of democracy, etc., and human rights, and to support regimes which are obviously non-democratic and which do not respect human rights. And so the populations, which are already frustrated because of the injustice in the Israel-Palestine case, continue to be even more frustrated because of the injustice which is being conducted in forcing populations to live under non-democratic regimes because they happen to be our friends.
Could I do a little thing here? Because we spoke earlier when we were saying you got some people who have power, you have people who are wealthy. I don't know what it might be, 20% of the world population. In every country there's a group that has ownership, they'll do that. And the people don't have power and haven't had power over a long time.
Yeah, the statistic is that 20% of the population of the world consumes 86% of the resources of the world.
That's a model of that. And that's the thing, you have that. So when you say we don't have democracy, in a very real sense, we don't have any, particularly economically, we don't have a democracy on the planet. We talk about democracy, but we don't. We have a series of plutocracies.
Correct.
In each of the political entities around the country. So the system in place is not a democracy. You know, I mean, in terms of what the future requires, in terms of the masses of people being brought in on it, yet we do have a capability to provide for them in a way technologically and so forth, perhaps, that is improving through time, and that we're not being able to take advantage of because our economics is outdated?
Yes, but
there's political power, and then there's economic power.
Yes, but there has always been a gap between precept and practice.
Yes, right.
Whether it is in religion or in morality or in economics or in politics.
Or in technological design, perhaps.
Always.
Yeah.
But in this case, we have a precept which is called democracy and a practice which is called non-democracy. And the gap is very big.
Yeah.
And this is creating enormous frustration. And you see the results of that frustration. And among those results is the Twin Towers. Because to believe that terrorism is a bunch of crazies is an oversimplification. It is not normal for human beings. Certainly not for those who are educated, certainly not for those who are married and who have children, certainly not for young mothers. It's not normal for them to strap on a suicide vest and just blow themselves up.
No, not at all.
And so we have to analyze what is that level of frustration and what are the root causes of that frustration which can help us in reversing this trend, which is unfortunately, as you know, destroying the structure on which we are based. We are based on a certain confidence that structure is good and that I will survive till tomorrow, but now everything is threatened.
What is the source of that level of frustration, do you think, among so many people in the world where they're willing to take that step? What is the source of it?
I think there are two or three sources.
Humiliation?
Yes. Humiliation to the extent of being pushed back with your back to the corner with no way out.
And no power.
No power.
No power.
And so all that you can do is to gnash your teeth and bite.
Yeah.
Like a mad dog.
Yeah.
But I think it is not properly analyzed to believe that a mad dog or a dog in a corner bites because the dog is mad. Perhaps we are at fault in pushing the dog into the corner in the first place.
Eric Fromm would have organized
And so, before we point fingers at others, we must remember that when you point a finger at somebody else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you.
That's right.
So let's examine ourselves.
Yeah, maybe you could also give us a little of your own. But you were in India, and we had for 500 years after Columbus a process of European-based, by and large, European-based colonization of the rest of the world. And they would establish, the Tommies would come out with their Gatling guns in India, and in 1857, a mutiny, they would colonize an area, put their stamp on it and so forth, and there was a tremendous reaction at a level of political and consciousness against the colonization, which seemed to be, at the end of the Second World, the zeitgeist was saying they were withdrawing from colonies. They withdrew from the Raj. They withdrew from other places and so forth. Is there a sense, and that's deep-seated in the minds of many people, the boot of colonization that had been felt by a foreign power from somewhere else, an Übermenschen kind of mentality like the Nazis tried to do. And is that part of a reaction by people who have just gotten out from under the boot of colonization that we say in the West don't understand sufficiently how sensitive that is or how important that is to the consciousness of people who remember all too well the boot of colonization and the fight against it? Or where does that fit into the picture as part of what creates a sense of humiliation and never again kind of thing will we submit ourselves to a colonizing position, a colonized position?
The point is that the history of the world is the history of its peoples. And peoples in the world have been civilizations. And these have been very rich civilizations. China, India, Aztecs, Mayas, etc. Africa, the empires of Benin in Africa, etc. These are civilizations. Our problem is that somewhere for the past 500 years or so, European civilization developed something called perspective, which is what you see in paintings.
Yes.
And that perspective gave European civilization the impression that it was the center of the world and therefore the holder of the truth. And it completely ignored that Europe is a land of bogs and bog people. When you talk of China, you have no business to be talking of.
There were people in China who thought they were the center of the universe too, and there were people in the Inca Empire who thought they were. People have that sense of seeing things through their own prism. I mean, it's not just.
But I would imagine, I would hope that our development, intellectual development, would lead us to believe that there is truth and richness in every civilization.
And there's great...
And that the warp and weft of the world requires us to have dialogue and empathy and study so that you can learn from others and be able to appreciate the strengths of other civilizations and in the process enrich yourselves.
And celebrate diversity.
Absolutely.
What a wonderful thing. I love New York City. You've got 189 countries in the UN now. It's 92. And I think I saw somebody said there's sizable communities of 189 of them in the New York City area.
Think it's great.
I think it's wonderful.
Absolutely.
I would think nothing would be more dull than to have everybody be the same. I revel in the diversity, do you not?
I do,
but
absolutely. Isn't it great that you can go into a restaurant, you can eat pasta, or you can eat tortillas,
not only that, but
or you can eat a pizza. Imagine what the world would be like if all of us were eating only hamburgers and Coke.
Well, too many of them are going that way, aren't they? I mean, they're all going that way. But that's a thing. So you're talking about that colonization and everything. It was interesting to me. You said the right of return. If you start going things in large patterns and things are coming to be related, they got a satellite array now called LISA that's going to be coming in about 2011, where they're going to be able to take a picture of the Big Bang 13.7 billion years ago. It's three-way connection. They got it down now 200,000 years after Big Bang. They can take a picture of the shockwave. They're going to have it down to a millisecond of the Big Bang. That's a pretty important measure of being able to take the measure of the universe coming out of 200,000 years of human experience. And if you go, we're all out of Africa, so the only return we have is that all human beings come from Africa. The only right of return we have is to Africa, and we let that poor continent suffer something terribly, don't we? There's something wrong in that. There's some sort of a poetic justice or something. You understand?
You're absolutely right. We are all Africans.
We are.
In origin, all of us.
Right. So that's our right to return.
Yes.
We're going to go back to the Serengeti Plain. I'm not sure I want to historically because we were pretty prey to the cats there, and there's been a lot of change. But we get to a point where we can make these changes. So you say it's that. Let's say Israel, does Israel have, we had, I can remember Mr. Wolfenson back in the 70s saying Iraq, invade Iraq. That was in the 70s he was talking. It wasn't just a thing. They were known as the crazies, and they seem to have taken over in this country and projected this power going into Iraq to undercut Iraq and so forth. And do you think there was a link between Likudnik elements within Israel? Israel went counter to the zeitgeist of European. They're perceived as Europeans invading into an area, whereas the rest of the world was retreating and allowing the nations to arise, and they went counter to it. And so they're like on the frontier, like we were out on the frontier with the Indians, and they had a thing, no good engine but a dead engine, wogs, they see them as wogs to be whipped into shape, that kind of thing. And you've got this, were there tendencies of right-wing Israeli involvement in the intellectual structure that led to the invasion of Iraq, or is that something that doesn't make sense to you?
I don't think it is fair either to talk about specific countries or specific people.
Okay, well
what we should be talking about is principles.
Okay.
The principle that we have to establish is that the concept of dialogue and the concept of empathy and a desire to live together in peace, recognizing diversity, is essential for the future of the world. And it can be done. It has been done in history. Between the Jews and the Muslims, there have been no problems. There have been problems between the Jews and the Christians, but not between the Jews and the Muslims.
That's what I understand.
And there is no problem. We need to be able to sit together and talk and say, okay, what's your problem? What's my problem here? Let's see if we can try out this such and such solution.
We're going to have to get around talking something about Iran in this particular time frame because that's all much on the cards now. But Ahmadinejad says that the Germans did the terrible Holocaust on the Jews. They should have given them Bavaria. If they're going to make some sort of retribution or something, rather than coming in and invading the Islamic world, and I think they pick up on that.
Well, President Ahmadinejad is an individual.
Yeah.
He does not represent the Iranian civilization, which is also 5,000 years old.
I know.
And which cannot be encapsulated in a single individual and in a soundbite.
Yeah, right.
Iran is an old country with an old civilization.
Yeah, Mithra goes way back. The Mithra and before Zoroastrianism and that kind of thing is a civilization.
And it is a remarkable country. I've visited Iran a few times. It is, to my mind, the only country which I know where a single girl dressed in that black tent, if you wish, but a single girl can hitchhike alone across the country in total safety.
Really?
No other country where you can do that. And you see it in, if you go to Tehran, you'll find girls standing on the road.
What does that tell us?
It tells us...
Could a girl in a normal frock or a normal summer dress hitchhike across and not have any problem? You said
that's not the point. The point is that a woman has enough respect from men that she can hitchhike in safety without having any problems of personal safety.
And that's not against some police state thing saying if anything happens you're going to get, it's not forced, it's a thing that's part of the culture? Where does that come from? You'd have a hard time doing that in the United
would be
States,
happy to have a police state where women could travel in total safety. The objective is safety of women.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever methodology is used to assure that, good.
Yeah. Well, Mussolini got the trains to run on time. I mean, there can be a forced kind of thing, but the thing is there a lesson there? But that's interesting that Iran is a rich civilization, and they are in the what do you call it? The sights of certain geopolitical forces. Christo and who was the other? Somebody else just said we ought to think about invading. Mr. Lieberman and other people
Yeah.
are saying we should invade and bomb, and there's a drumbeat of propaganda, much that was there before we went to Iraq, to bomb or attack Iran because they're a threat, and they're a threat to, you got Hezbollah, and you
Yes,
got
but,
Nasrallah and all that kind of thing.
How many countries are we going to bomb?
Well, that's what I'm
one
saying,
after
but that's
the
the
other.
next one. And they're talking about bunker buster atomic weapons now in
Yes.
order to get, do you understand what I'm saying? And then that's easing on up into Pakistan now.
Yes.
So maybe we could move over to the east a little bit
Yeah,
in
quite
terms of our
let's-
thinking about Israel.
Let's just
And the Middle
bomb
East.
everybody.
And, well, I know, but what I'm saying is it's a danger now.
Of course it is. India and Pakistan is another problem which is extremely serious.
Perhaps the most
And it is
dangerous
beca-
part of the world is
I
India
think
and
it is
Pakistan,
becoming
with the Kashmir issue, yeah.
Yes, because it's large to begin with.
Yeah,
Between India and Pakistan, you are at 1.3 billion people,
that's right.
or 1.4. It's not a small population mass.
Hardly.
The area of India plus Pakistan is much bigger than the area of Europe. And so you're dealing with very large entities
Yeah.
and large populations, and populations with a past. These are not new countries. These are countries with a intellectual history which goes back
Indus civilization?
2500 BC and
Right.
beyond.
Right, right.
So, and between the two countries, the relationship is slightly uneasy.
Slightly.
It is, I'm being diplomatic.
Okay.
The Pakistani point of view
Yeah.
on India is that India has expanded itself aggressively.
Sees themselves as a superpower.
Six times. No,
Okay,
India,
no.
physical expansion.
Okay.
Kashmir, Junagadh, Hyderabad, Goa, Pondicherry, Sikkim. The area physically, aggressively conquered by India is larger than the size of Texas,
Wow. All
and a
right.
population larger than 80 million. And so this expansionism of India is something which all its neighbors watch with great concern.
They would like to
That's
be.
why
Oh.
India has 6 neighbors.
Yeah.
Not one of them does it get along with. Not one.
Not one does it get along with.
None.
Including China.
Of course not.
Yeah.
They've had a war with
Yeah.
China.
Right.
So
And they have a regional superpower ambitions.
which is fair if they are
That's
big.
the way countries go.
Okay,
sometimes.
fine. I don't mind.
Yeah.
But you have to respect the territory of your neighbors. You may be a very powerful person with a large estate, but that does not mean you can start nibbling into the land of your neighbors. But that is what has been happening. Now, the complication is that now both India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
And
Since
that
98.
makes them very dangerous. Now, both countries, incidentally, have behaved responsibly with their nuclear weapons.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thank God.
Because that black swan guns of August thing could start there very easily.
But who knows? Who can read into the future? Nuclear weapens are not child's toys. And so what
No, that alarms me. They're like juggling them as though they
what
are.
worries me is that there is an expansion of nuclear weaponry in the world, and people are talking only of nuclear non-proliferation when they should be talking of nuclear disarmament.
Thank
we
you
need
very
to
much,
get
yeah.
rid of nuclear weapons.
They put the clock
They
up
are-
to 5 minutes now.
They are useless weapons. They cannot be used.
That's right.
And so if we can't use them, let's just get rid of
Do
them
you think Libya set a
universally.
good tone by their stance on the atomic weapons question?
I think so, but not just Libya.
South Africa?
South Africa, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, all these are countries
Is it
which had
enough
nuclear
for them
weaponry.
to disarm? Is it enough for us collectively as human society, evolution of conscience, big picture? Is it enough for us to just disarm, or do we have to come to some rendezvous with what would be the adverse side of the destructive? It seems yin and yang. You've got a destructive capability. There must be some sort of an alteration in terms of, on the positive side, a dimension of being able to bring what Fuller would have called livingry rather than killingry. And that, we'd have to have some reason. Has something changed in terms of the reality that makes possible a just order where we can provide for people in a way that historically we haven't been able to, and we're not realizing the design capability of what we intellectually know we're capable of doing because our systems are outdated in terms of they won't allow us to provide for what we technologically and know we have a capability we can't realize on the living side.
But we can
and
do
the
that.
frustration in that.
Yeah, well, we can do that. But nuclear weapons have no role in this.
Okay.
Because nuclear weapons are dangerous. They have a long lifespan. It goes into 10,000 years of danger.
Yeah, half-life.
And because they cannot be used, they've been used only twice by only one country, and they cannot be repeated. And so if you can't use it, and if it is so dangerous, and if we have enough alternatives available to us in bunker busters and whatnot, why do we, and fuel air bombs?
But they're going into new phases. They're still doing it.
I think we need to get rid through an agreement, and this has to be a UN agreement. Get rid of, we've done it in chemical weapons, let's do it in nuclear weapons also.
Well, okay, that would be good. That would be good. One of the problems is there's so many things we can talk about, and we've got, there's only so much time along the space-time continuum. We run out of time along the time, almost, and everything. And we do want to talk some. You've been interested in communications and capability. The United Nations and the thing you're doing is a communicating capability. We're in communication here in terms of public access and that. Do you see any hope? We have YouTube. We have different kinds of things that are coming out of the computer developments. It seems in many people's mind they're talking about terabyte computers now. They're talking about in the exponential increasing. We're coming to carbon 60 in terms of the basis for information. Do you see any hope in the ability for us to communicate that might help set a context that could allow some of these better scenarios to emerge than the very dangerous ones that we are? What's the role of communications as we begin to look ahead, both in terms of just technological infrastructure and then the educational mission that could be involved in that?
It's a great force multiplier. This is for the first time in history that human beings anywhere in the world have full access to information.
Can have, or do.
If you have a computer, and if you have electricity and an internet service provider.
A lot of people don't.
But if you do, it doesn't matter if you're sitting in the outer reaches of Mongolia, you have the same access to information as the President of the United States.
Okay, now that's something pretty new, I think, don't you, in terms of the evolution of communication?
This is the end product of the Gutenberg Bible, which was printing. Printing, then it became pocket books. Now you have universal access, provided you have electricity, a telephone line, and a computer, which you don't always have.
If you want broadband, you better get a cable line or
But
something.
if you have that, that's the positive. The negative is that you now have access to so much information that you cannot absorb it. And with the help of Google, you still can focus and try to get the information that you really want.
It helps.
It helps. But you are being overwhelmed by information. And then you are being overwhelmed by something which is totally different, which is non-information, or what you call spam, which is people misusing the information by
trying to make
bombarding you. Not a buck, they are bombarding you with useless information, and you don't know how to sift.
That's called Norbert Wiener. I have a friend of mine whose dad was a scholar of Ptolemy, but he was also involved he was in a room with Norbert Wiener. He claims his dad was 48 or 46 when they coined the term cyber. It means steersman and everything. And Norbert Wiener used to say information overload within a system. We've all been divided up into, we're individuals and we have state. We're divided up into specializations and so forth. But overall, the Vedics and so forth have been telling us it's all one seamless web. We walk around in a sea of bacteria and it's all one system, really. But we're divided up into parts of it and so forth. Is if you, in a systems understanding, if you have information overload within a system, you say we have information overload, it permits pattern recognition between that system and another system. So you have interface of various systems so you can begin to comprehensively understand the pattern of which we are part. There was a time when we didn't even know people existed on the other part of the world, but now you can get a comprehensive pattern recognizing of the whole pattern, which would be something that might make it possible for us to navigate more appropriately or move toward a design science revolution of some sort or something like that.
There are two different aspects to this.
Please.
The first is that it is not so much information overload, which we could handle. It is disinformation overload, which is troubling us. Spam, nonsense, which is moving around. And now, if you open your computer on email, you will find that 95% of the emails that you are receiving are nonsense.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I just
Today,
you
can now, the figures are 2 million spam emails are being sent out every second. 2 million a second.
Is there a technological way that could be addressed?
No,
couldn't it be addressed? Well, is it something that we just have to let that go? Isn't there some way there could be a protective system, like an antivirus or something?
No, you can't. You have to use your brains and say this is morality requires that you don't do this.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
But
okay.
the second thing is that even if you have information overload, it is what you can absorb. And so you come back to your brain. It's not just the information which is coming in, it's your ability to analyze it and absorb it and use it.
Well,
and this is what, you know, when we went into the LSD situation years ago, what LSD did was that it destroyed the ability of your brain to filter out the unnecessary inputs that were coming in. And so you went crazy because everything became interesting. The purpose of the brain is not just to absorb, it's also to filter out. And so how do you filter out the information that you do not need in order to be able to stay within your absorptive capacity?
Okay, let's just talk in this line for a minute, if we could, because you got information. And one of the things that Bucky Fuller, you know, I happen to like, he's among others, Teilhard de Chardin, there have been other, you know, Voltaire, there have been some people who really thought and so forth, but he used to say that that the pirates that run the world, let's just say we've got people who run the world, they have control over the levers of power, the armies and all that sort of thing. They consciously set up graduate schools in order to get the best mind. They're not going to worry about the dollars. Their best minds coming up so specialized out on a particular subject. The use of the pluperfect tense in 13th century French poetry in the south of France. And they would specialize so on that they could never think about the whole pattern. The pattern thinking, the way the strategic thinking of the leaders have been, and then they would be, in a certain sense, unable, they're so involved in going into the details of that kind of thing, specialization. Academia has galloped towards specialization. They get them so co-opted out on a particular thing that they never think about the patterns between the systems, the interface between the disciplines and so forth, and it's all one system. So that it may be that that it's making it possible for us to see the patterns in the way they have seen it and come up with some solutions that are going to bring some benefit to the people because they're not being so specialized out they can't see the whole. That's a different way of seeing it.
There's the problem of the forest and the trees.
Perhaps,
and there's no doubt that we are experts on trees, but that we do not understand the forests. It's a great pity.
Are you optimistic, pessimistic for the human prospect as you look out? Do you have grandchildren now?
I have I'm about to have a grandchild. Yes.
Oh, congratulations to you and the whole family. You know, that's wonderful.
But,
Are you optimistic, pessimistic for the human prospect?
Unfortunately, I am psychologically a pessimist, and I have a tendency to see things through black-colored glasses and not rose-colored glasses. But it troubles me that with all the potential that we have in the internet and the information
and
that we have
in public access television,
despite all the strength that we have in media, that we should have made such a mess of all the information that we have at our disposal. And that shows that there is some sort of a mental disease that we have which does not allow us to stay on the straight and narrow with all the information that we have and just to get fooled by what you call the trees and the detail rather than the overall direction.
There used to be people thinking in broad patterns more than there is. It's a way of co-opting into dividing and conquer, the British would call it. You divide and conquer the intellectual community. It's not that you wouldn't expect the answers to be coming from the political elite. It's going to come from the intellectual community, and it's the intellectual community that's falling down on the job of providing an alternative to normally seeing things, events and so forth, and thinking outside the box or in terms of patterns between various things. It seems to me that's where the problem is. And I like to think maybe just the UN is very important as an institution. So I also like to think this public access that you and I are talking about.
I think you are the most important person.
No, you are the most
public
important
access.
person. No, public access, like Woody Allen. No, you are the most important. But it's important, and I do think that the public access it becomes like an autodidactic university. YouTube is curriculum,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So they should be thinking in large terms in terms of these things. And it seems to me what you've been doing at the UN and the work you've been doing is really important, and I want to thank you for that. Again, one of the problems is we run out of time. We've got a couple of minutes left. But you think it maybe we're at a time where we could just end this whole line of taking the measure of things by destroying it. Michio Kaku says there are probably systems out in universes or parallel universes where they reach this point, they can't make a transition to where people are liberated. The whole orchestra of the human society is liberated to realize their full potential now available that we didn't have out of history and that kind of thing. They can't transcend, and they destroy themselves.
Yeah, but one of the trends that we have to watch carefully is that the concept of right-wing extremism, which was always a marginal issue 20 years, 30 years ago.
They called them the lunatic fringe.
Has somehow become mainstream.
I know.
It is now respectable to be a right-wing extremist, and this has nothing to do with the United States. It's a universal phenomenon.
Really?
You see it around the world. And I think we need to sit back and analyze how is it that what you call the lunatic fringe has now become the mainstream and respectable mainstream. Well, this is a trend which has to be watched very carefully.
Indeed, I think, and it might come out of a frustration. If we're in a situation where we can destroy, that's pretty, maybe you didn't brought, we can destroy the whole system, or we can maybe liberate the whole system in a way that never has been in history. That's and we have a capability we can't realize. It's a schizophrenia built into the lack of vision that by which this train is going down the track. It seems to me it creates a tremendous pressure of schizophrenia or of frustration on the part of the people of the planet.
Once again, I'm the pessimist and you are the optimist. And I think, therefore, between the two of us, we have a future.
Maybe. I hope so. And one thing's for sure, I want to make sure those grandchildren, I got 4 of them, you got 1 coming, we want to make sure there's a future. It seems to me public access might help, and I really appreciate your coming in and sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure.
And your wit with us and the audience. Your pleasure to have had the perceptions of a grand gentleman, and that being Ahmad Kamal. He was, as you heard, long-term associate diplomatic person at the UN and representing the country of Pakistan and the intellectual community in a very real sense. Thanks an awful lot for all of that, and I really appreciate your coming in. So good to see you again. Welcome to MNN again.
Look forward.
My pleasure. Tune in. We'll come back again tomorrow. That's it for now. But once again, thanks again, Ahmad Kamal, for coming in. So we just sort of touched on a number of things. What an interesting time to be alive.
It is.
The most interesting ever.
It is, no doubt about it. It's the most interesting, and I tell all my